Good morning and welcome to today's 9 Online. My name is Michelle and I'm so glad to be with you today as we continue studying the book of Exodus and the life of Moses. Today, Moses, the same Moses who was the baby who was placed in the basket in the Nile River, is now a grown man. The book of Acts tells us he was 40 years old at this point in time, and we don't know what precipitated today's choice, but Moses has already had a really great education in the land of Egypt. He's been living a life of ease in the palace, and now he's made a decision. And I like to say whether it was a midlife crisis, since the book of Acts tells us that he was about 40, but it very well could have been a desire to get to know his ethnic heritage, or maybe he just became disillusioned with a life of ease in the palace. Maybe God was stirring in his heart and causing him to want to go and see how life was for the Israelites. But whatever precipitated his choice, that is exactly what he did. Today we're reading from Exodus 2, and we'll be talking about 11 through 25. But I want to read verse 11 to you, the first half of it. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. Moses went and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Now, at this point in time, we see that Moses is sensing some solidarity with the Hebrews here. And it's important to remember people's life stories impact them for their entire lives. Remember, Moses is the only living adult man his age with Hebrew lineage, because all of the other boys born around before and after him for a certain period of time were murdered. Moses' mom saved him by putting him in that basket and sending him down the Nile River. But now here he is, he's an adult, and he's back, and he's seeing the way his people are being treated. And he starts to feel some sense of, I'm with them. This is who I've decided to be with. I like to imagine that day in the camp as he's there and watching and seeing all that's happening to the Israelites. I wonder what it was like to hear that language again. I wonder if that stirred something deep within him, or if all of that had already started. But we do know that being separated from his family of origin at whatever age it was, probably at least 3, he would have had childhood trauma. That is something I don't think we often remember about some of the people who lived during the Bible times. They were people just like us. And here Moses has been ripped from everything he knows, his entire culture in the slave camps, with the mom who adores him, who loves him so much. She was nursing him. She made this basket to send him down the river. She loved him, but at some point he had to leave her. And so now here he is back in the camp of the Israelites, and he sees all the things that are happening. And this Egyptian is beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. And the verse goes on, then verse 12 says, looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He buried him. I am sure that when Moses got up that morning, he didn't say, I think I'm going to burn all my bridges today and murder someone. We know that this was a crime of passion. But what that means is that he felt such a sense of injustice and fury. He was enraged by this, that he was able to act out of it in a sinful way and kill someone. I think today in our society we'd be like, life's over for you. God can't use you. That is not true. One of the sweetest times of worship I've ever experienced was in a federal prison in Louisiana. I listened to men who'd been convicted to prison for life sing and worship. They were singing the song, my chains are gone, I've been set free. And the irony of that did not escape me. They're in prison for life, and they're singing about their chains being freed. God does not limit us because of our sin. Moses sinned. He messed up, and this isn't the only time that happens in his lifetime. And I know I've messed up, you've messed up, but God isn't done with us. Don't think that your sin is strong enough to thwart God's plans. God has plans for you. He had plans for Moses, and he was putting that passion within Moses' heart. God made sure Moses was saved for such a time as this coming, just like Esther was there when God planned for her to be there with her people. Moses has a purpose and has a calling, but he needs to wait on God's plan and God's timing. So Moses went and killed the Egyptian. The next day he comes into the Hebrew camp. I think In my imagination, he's coming in like, okay, guys, let's do this. You're strong, muscular slaves that have been working hard. They would have been very strong. Let's unite. There are millions of people strong. Let's unite. Let's form a band of people to make a revolt, an uprising, and change the history of our people. But the people weren't ready. They were being abused and they were being forced to work very hard, but they were not ready. But what Moses finds when he comes into the camp the next day is so disappointing to him. And I think this is because often, and not always, but often, people who are adopted idealize their birth families. They idealize what their parents must be like in the situations that they're now in. And it doesn't always happen this way, but often they end up being saddened when they find the dysfunction or the poverty that still exists. And so Moses, I think, has some of the same things going on. Like, these are my people, and we're going to make a difference. And he gets there, and he finds two men fighting. So this is in verse 13. He says, the next day, he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? Why are you fighting with your brother? You have to remember, these people have been living in violence possibly their entire lives. We don't know how old these two men are, but Moses is very disappointed, I think frightened and saddened by what this man says. But the man says, who made you ruler and judge over us? This is verse 14. Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. And it had become known. And so the Pharaoh finds out, and he decides to make Joseph the most wanted man in Egypt. And so Moses. And so he flees into the wilderness for 40 years. Moses is out in the wilderness. I think during this time, God was working on him to control that temper, which I'm not sure he ever totally got control of. But for 40 years, God had him in the wilderness and the people of Israel preparing for what's coming. We know, and I don't want to get ahead of my portion today, but we know that God had a plan for Moses, and Moses' sin was not too much. It didn't stop God's plan. So in Hebrews, we read Hebrews chapter 11, which is often called the faith chapter, the hero, Hall of Fame or Hall of Faith with God. And it's Hebrews chapter 11, and the author writes this. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. So in the chapter of God's heroes, we read about Moses, but guess what it doesn't say? It doesn't say, oh, and Moses messed up. Yeah, there's proof. There's a man buried in the desert. It doesn't say that at all. It talks about his faith and how he conquered these things through faith. God had a plan, and Moses was saved for such a time as this. And God wanted him to not do it alone, not do it in his own strength or the strength of the muscles of the Hebrew men, but he wanted them to do it in his time with his help in his way. So if ever you feel tempted to say that I've messed up too many times, I've done too much, my sin is too bad, God can't use me, remember that no matter what mistakes you've made, God is not finished with you yet. And I have a little illustration here to show you that when he left Egypt, Moses was the most wanted, and this is a picture of the Prince of Egypt, but Moses was the most wanted, but in the end, God saw him as a hero of the faith. Our sin is not stronger than God's plans. So today, use courage, step out, and do what God is calling you to do. Make a difference for eternity. And can I challenge you right now to take a moment to pause and pray about that? Honestly, will you pause and pray and ask God, what is it that you want me to be doing for you? He has a plan for you. You are not beyond God's use. Have a great day.